On the western edge of southern Idaho's Magic Valley lies a town relatively unchanged by the forward march of time. Home to a rich and lush ecosystem, fresh water springs, and a wide variety of creatures, the Hagerman Valley has and always will be a local epicenter for outdoor activities like fishing, hiking, and hunting. Before there was any thought of a town here, however, there was a great swamp. A little over 3 million years ago, in a time referred to as the Pleistocene era, there was abundant life all around this area, sustained by the thriving vegetation. Mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and Borophagonine, more commonly known as bone-crushing dogs, inhabited where the Hagerman fossil beds now stand. More notably, the area was home to Equus symplecitans, or the Hagerman horse. These animals' fossils give us a unique glimpse into the creatures that ruled over this area in the time before the last great ice age, during the early evolution of man. Then, between 12 and 15,000 years ago came the Great Bonneville Flood. As a result of the Utah-Bonneville Lake breaching, a massive wall of water tore through the Magic Valley, carving out the Snake River Canyon from the black basalt rock. This cataclysmic event not only brought the Pleistocene fossils closer to the surface, but also stripped massive pieces from the canyon walls, leaving fields of lava melon boulders, some as big as cars, downstream at the close of the Hagerman Valley. As the modern Snake River travels its nearly 50 miles from Twin Falls to King Hill, it plummets 1,000 feet downward, lending a compelling history of ancient volcanic activity. Old lava flows were eroded away over time, forming the world-famous Thousand Springs, which stretch for hundreds of yards along the northern canyon wall. This area, now stretched and contorted to fit the needs of modern-day humans, stands as a testament to how powerful Mother Nature can be and how beautiful her handiwork is. Within the last several thousand years, the Great Hagerman Valley has been home, temporary or otherwise, to an impressive assortment of peoples. Around 7,000 years ago, early stone-wielding natives utilized the area's natural resources by making the valley their winter fishing grounds, as made evident by the tools and weapons found in as uncanny of places as locals' backyards. This tradition went on for ages. Thousands of Shoshone Indians were fed and sustained by the gracious river, and their history is kept alive through the stones and other artifacts that they left behind. White men didn't enter the stage here until Wilson Price Hunt and Ramsey Crooks visited the valley as members of the 1811 Astor Expedition, which hoped to set up a trading post at the mouth of the Columbia River for fur trappers in what is now Astoria. Hunt kept a journal of his trek across North America, and his accounts of passing through the Magic Valley are riddled with tales of death and hardship brought on by the mighty Snake River and the imposing rapids along its winding path. More visitors came in the following years. After 1816, beaver trapping became a major source of income for peoples in the West, and the valley served as a resting place as well as a landmark for thousands of trappers and mountain men. Missionaries en route for Oregon country also crossed the valley along the way, and for much of the 19th century the song remained the same. The Oregon Trail passes right through the valley. Wagon ruts can still be seen from the road leading up to the Hagerman Horse Fossil National Monument, although trespassing near the old tracks is strictly prohibited. Immigrants traded with local Native Americans and marveled at the Thousand Springs. It wasn't until the 1860s, when the federal government began establishing mail and stage routes through the area, that people started making the valley their permanent home. With the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in Utah and the increase in mining around the Boise Valley, more and more settlers wandered into the Snake River Plain. Though some established businesses for transportation and trading, the valley mostly attracted farmers, especially sheep farmers.
I grew up in Hagerman, and my parents were had sheep, and they lambed them out at my ranch and in Hagerman, and then they would take them out on the desert in the spring, and then they would eventually get to Cape Horn. That's the headwaters of the Middle Fork of the Salmon River, 17 miles north of Stanley. And my dad would always take me. When I wasn't in school, I would get to go with my dad. And so I would go out to sheep camp, and
my father had sheep, and so that summer I was 1 month old when we went to Stanley. He had forest right up there, and that's where he ran the sheep, and he had about 8,000 sheep at that time. He started in partners with another man, and then he bought him out. In 1936, he paid him off and bought him out and took us to Europe. He was an immigrant. My dad was an immigrant from Great Britain. He just worked all his life. He never had any education. And as far as schooling was concerned, when he was working with the sheep, there was a little country school out on the Wendell Road in Hagerman Valley over there on the crossroads. And he went there one winter and worked with the sheep at night. He was a night herder. So we grew up on the go all the time. We would go to Stanley in the summer, and then we would move out. There's no running water, no bathroom, and it wasn't even insulated. And I graduated from high school, we were still doing that. So I know what it's like to be clean and have wonderful food and not have any modern facilities, you know. And we lived here in between in the same way, but up at Stanley. My father, when he married my mother, he said, "I want you to go with me. I don't want you to stay home." All the other sheepmen's wives stayed home, either lived in Boise or just stayed home in Hagerman. There was lots of sheep, about 100,000 I think at one time in here.
Throughout the early 20th century, advancements in irrigation allowed for early settlers of the valley to utilize the fertile volcanic soil, and agriculture secured its footing in Hagerman. Idaho Power started harnessing the Snake River's downward momentum at the widest part of the valley in 1916, bringing further development and more jobs to the area.
I grew up in this house and went to Hagerman School, and I was always wanted to do things. I was pretty strong-willed, and when I was little, I'd put on plays. I'd get all the neighbor kids, and we'd pull a curtain. My mother would let me take a sheet, and we'd make a stage, and I'd write the plays. I haven't any idea what they were about, but we'd write the plays, and the kids girls would come, and we would invite our parents and have lots of fun here.
The Hagerman Valley also has seen a number of artists pass through, leaving lasting impressions on the culture of the town. The two most notable characters were Vardis Fisher and Archie Teeter. Fisher was Idaho's most famous author. He wrote many westerns as well as nonfiction titles about Idaho and a 12-volume deep dive into the history of man from caves to modern civilizations. Archie Teeter was born in the valley on May 5, 1901, and lived in caves and covered wagons for most of his early life. He lived like a nomad, working odd-end jobs for the Forest Service or fishermen just long enough to have money to paint. He'd then venture all across the West, most frequently to Jackson Hole. He's believed to have created over 4,000 paintings throughout his over half-century career. Many of his paintings were just owned by people who knew him or his wife personally, but he managed to earn enough to commission the only Frank Lloyd Wright house in the state of Idaho, right here in Hagerman. Though it's nearly impossible to see the house now, it's an architectural marvel, and Teeter used it as his studio for the last 20 years of his life as he traveled the world creating masterpieces on canvas.
Yes, I remember before they built the Teeter house that Frank Lloyd Wright built for him, he lived up Malad Canyon on the north side of the Malad River. You just cross the bridge and you turn right there, and there's a trail. There's a gate on it now, but there didn't used to be. And he lived up there in a cabin that he it wasn't a new cabin. It had been an old homesteader shack or something, but it had a huge big fireplace, and he built onto that and lived there for several years while he was getting established. And then Frank Lloyd Wright House came along, and he moved down there. But I knew him through that period of time.
Hagerman is not a lot different than when I grew up. It's still small. We have, actually, see, Hagerman is one of the oldest towns in Idaho. And they had banks, and so it actually is not as big as it used to be.
So maybe it's gotten a little smaller, and maybe the painters and the authors are long gone, but this valley, this oasis in the desert, is still a masterpiece in and of itself. Private, state, and federal fish hatcheries litter the area, bringing great fishing for all ages just about anywhere you can find water. The Thousand Springs, though slightly redirected now by Idaho Power, are still a wonder to behold. The Hagerman Historical Society Museum preserves some of the greatest stories from the town's early life and its people. Hundreds of teeter paintings, wedding gowns sewn from returning soldiers' parachutes, saddles, and ceremonial robes don the walls, immersing you in the culture of the town. Just taking a minute to talk with the people who've been here since nearly the beginning takes you back in time, and you see through their eyes. You feel the heavy wool sacks on your back, the cold of the winter nights, and the thrill of the hunts. Before we started out on this journey to learn about Hagerman, I'd only been exposed to the city through elementary school trips to look at the horse fossil and leave. But after just spending a day here, no, just a few hours, I fell in love with the beauty of the area. You can find a trail and get lost in the curves of the hills. You can kayak for hours through quickly flowing water, or just sit in Wilson's and enjoy the company. The history of Hagerman is alive and well thanks to a few passionate people, but the forward march of time is beginning to wear down on the stories that are still around. It takes us, the young people inheriting this beautiful valley, taking an interest in the treasure that is the Hagerman Valley. Go there. Feel the sun beat down on you as you walk along the same trail as thousands of pioneers. Fly fish at Billingsley Creek while you still can. Make the world see that Hagerman is still here, before time washes it away. Thanks for watching.